The man's fist came down on the table so hard the water glasses jumped. Every head in the diner turned. Naomi Delacroix-Monroe didn't turn. She was already looking at him, had been looking at him for the 3 seconds it took her to understand exactly what kind of man he was, and exactly how little that was going to change what she did next. She set down the coffee pot, slowly, deliberately, the way her grandmother set things down when she was done being polite, and she said it, quiet, final, in Korean so clean it cut the room in half. Raise your voice one more time. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because everyone in that diner, everyone except Naomi, knew exactly who was sitting at table 7. And nobody in Seoul, nobody in this city, in this country, in any room this man had ever walked into, had ever spoken to one of his men like that. Nobody. Until tonight. And the most dangerous part, she meant every single word. But let's go back, because nothing that happened that Tuesday night in Itaewon made any sense unless you understood who Naomi Delacroix-Monroe was, where she came from, and what she was willing to lose. And if you've been here before, you already know. We don't do halfway. Let's get into it. Naomi was 29 years old, and she had been in Seoul for 14 months longer than she planned. She came from New Orleans, 7th Ward, the kind of neighbourhood where the houses leaned slightly toward each other like they were sharing secrets, where second-line music found you through walls on Sunday mornings, where her grandmother Mamie could silence a room with one look, and her mother Odette could feed 12 people with what most would call nothing. The women in Naomi's family were built a specific way, warm to the bone, immovable at the core. She had a communications degree from Tulane she'd never used, a mother who called every Sunday at 7 a.m. New Orleans time, and a dead aunt whose diner she couldn't bring herself to close. Aunt Celeste had been the family's great adventure. 40 years ago she fell in love with a Korean chef named Song in a restaurant kitchen in New Orleans, followed him to Seoul, and built something small and warm and impossible in the middle of Itaewon. Song died young. Celeste stayed. For 30 years she ran that diner, Celeste's, and made it a place where anyone from anywhere could sit down and feel like somebody expected them. When Celeste died 14 months ago, she left Naomi the diner, the recipe book, and 14 million won in unpaid debt. The plan was 3 weeks, settle the estate, close the diner, go home. But the diner smelled like her aunt. The regulars kept coming, and Naomi, who had never once in her life walked away from something that needed protecting, stayed. She kept the sign Celeste had hand-painted above the counter in Korean and English, the brushwork uneven and perfect. Dadeoshamun, gongjada. Warmth costs nothing. Coldness costs everything. She kept the staff. She kept the hours. She kept the green notebook in her apron where she counted the days and tracked the expenses, and wrote her aunt's name inside the front cover, because saying a person's name was how you kept them alive. What she did not keep was any illusion that this was going to be easy. The debt was real. The lease was real. Her mother's Sunday calls where Odette asked carefully, too carefully, "Baby, when are you coming home?" were real. Naomi worked doubles. She learned every regular's order by heart. She called elderly women Halmione, grandmother, with the same warmth Celeste had, and young men share the way Mamie had called everyone, and she meant both with her whole chest. She was counting days. She was always counting days. That Tuesday it was raining. The diner was full by 9. Good full. The warm kind, where the windows fogged slightly and the smell of doenjang jjigae moved through the room, and everyone seemed to have silently agreed to stay a little longer than they meant to. Emeka was at table 6. 23. Nigerian, studying engineering at Yonsei, could never decide between 2 things on the menu, and always needed an extra minute. Naomi gave it to him every time without making him feel small about it, He called her Nuna, older sister, and tipped first, before he even tasted the food. Mr. and Mrs. Lim were at their booth. They were always at their booth. 30 years of Tuesdays, same table, same order. Mr. Lim always pouring his wife's tea before his own. Mrs. Lim had told Naomi once, quietly, that this diner was where she and her husband had their first date, that Celeste had given them extra rice and winked, that they'd been coming back ever since because some places held your memories for you. Naomi had written that in the green notebook, not the expenses page, the other page, the one she kept for reasons to stay. Deanna was at the counter. Her best friend, Korean-American, soul transplant, fashion PR, chronically overdressed for a Tuesday diner but completely unbothered by it. She was on her phone, one hand wrapped around a coffee, occasionally glancing up to mouth things at Naomi that Naomi ignored with practiced efficiency. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Until it wasn't. The street went quiet first. That was the thing nobody could explain afterward. How the rain kept falling, but something underneath the sound of it changed. Like the city took a breath and held it. 3 black SUVs, no logos, parked outside with the calm of vehicles that had never once been ticketed and never would be. Deanna's phone lowered. Mr. and Mrs. Lim looked up from their tea. Emeka stopped reading the menu. And then the door opened. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now. Now let's keep going, because it's about to get very interesting. He came in alone. 4 men followed, but he was alone in the way that mattered, the way that said the 4 men were furniture, and he was the room. He was tall, lean, somewhere in his early 40s, wearing a plain dark coat that cost more than Naomi's monthly lease and was designed to look like it didn't. No visible watch, no logos, nothing that performed wealth because nothing needed to. He sat at table 7, corner, back to the wall, clear sightline to every entrance and exit. He did it without looking, the way people find their footing on stairs they've walked 1,000 times. He ordered without looking up. Korean, quiet, precise. Black coffee, doenjang jjigae. Naomi took the order. Their eyes met for 1 second when she reached across to take his menu. He had the darkest, most unreadable eyes she'd ever looked into. Not cold exactly, just still, the way very deep water was still. And then he looked away. She went back to the counter. Deanna was beside her in 4 seconds, voice dropped to almost nothing. Naomi, that is Park Joon-seo. Naomi glanced back at table 7. Okay. No, not okay. Park, Joon-seo, the Park family, port contracts, the whole northern corridor. There was a journalist 2 years ago who wrote 1 article and then moved to Vancouver. And nobody has heard from Deanna. What? I have 4 tables. She went back to work. She brought Joon-seo his coffee. He didn't acknowledge her. She didn't require him to. She checked on the Lims, brought Emeka his food, refilled the French professor's water without being asked. Ordinary Tuesday. And then Kwon spoke. He was the senior one. She clocked that immediately. Mid-40s, the kind of large that came from consequence rather than gym, a face that had made decisions and lived with them. He didn't stand up. He spoke from his chair, directly to the side of Naomi's face while she was mid-sentence taking Emeka's dessert order. Korean, flat, the tone of someone who had never once had to ask for anything twice. Clear the surrounding tables. Now. Naomi finished writing Emeka's dessert order, didn't turn around. Emeka looked between her and Kwon with the careful stillness of a young man who had grown up in Lagos and knew instinctively when a room had shifted into territory that required absolute neutrality. Naomi capped her pen, tucked her notepad into her apron. Then she turned. She looked at Kwon, the way her grandmother Mamie looked at things that needed to be assessed before they were addressed. Fully, without rush, without fear. She looked at Mrs. Lim's bowl of kimchi jjigae, still half full, steam still rising. She looked at Mr. Lim's hand resting over his wife's on the table. 30 years of Tuesdays. A first date that Celeste had blessed with extra rice and a wink. She looked back at Kwon. They were here first. The words landed simply. No aggression, no performance, just fact, stated by someone who considered it sufficient. Kwon's jaw tightened. She watched it happen. The small movement of a man recalibrating from request to instruction. He leaned forward in his chair. His voice dropped into a register she recognized. It was the register that in every language, in every city, in every room meant the same thing. I am not asking. Clear these tables, right now. Mrs. Lim's hand moved beneath Mr. Lim's. A small, involuntary flinch. The kind of movement that came from a lifetime of knowing when to make yourself smaller. She began reaching for her bag. And that was the moment. Not Kwon's voice. Not his size. Not the 4 men at table 7 or the 3 SUVs outside or the name Deanna had whispered at the counter like a warning from a nightmare. It was Mrs. Lim's hand reaching for her bag after 30 years of Tuesdays that moved something in Naomi from still to decided. She didn't step back. She didn't look at table 7. She kept her eyes on Kwon with the specific quality of attention her grandmother had taught her. The look that said, I see exactly what you are, and I have already decided how this ends. Kwon stood up. The chair scraped. He was above her now. 8 inches, easy, broad-shouldered, filling the space between the tables like a wall deciding to become a door. The entire diner contracted. Deanna's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. The French professor's fork rested against his plate without sound. Emeka's hands were flat on the table, completely still, his eyes forward. Kwon's voice came up, hard and public, the kind of voice designed not just to instruct, but to humiliate, to make the room understand the distance between his world and hers. 야, 지금 뭐 하는 거야? 여기가 어딘지 알아. 저 테이블 당장 비우라고. Hey, what do you think you're doing? Do you know where you are? Clear those tables right now. The diner had stopped pretending to be a diner. Every person in it was motionless, caught between the instinct to look and the instinct to disappear. Naomi looked up at Kwon, and she said it, not loudly, not with her voice shaking, not with anger, because anger would have made it smaller. She said it the way New Orleans women said everything that mattered. Quietly, completely, with no exit clause built in Korean so clean and certain it could have been carved into the wall beside Celeste's sign. Raise your voice one more time. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The sentence finished itself in the imagination of everyone who heard it, and whatever they imagined was worse than anything she could have said out loud. 1 beat of silence. 2. And then from table 7, from 18 inches away, close enough that she could have reached out and touched the sleeve of his plain dark coat. 1 word came, barely above a murmur. Unhurried. Absolute. Landing in the room like something dropped from a very great height. Sit down. Park Joon-seo had not moved. His hands were flat on the table. He was speaking to the surface of it, or to the air, or to no one in particular. And yet there was no one in that room who didn't understand it was the most directed thing said all evening. Kwon heard it. Every man at table 7 heard it. The walls heard it. Kwon sat down, not slowly, not with dignity. He sat down the way a man sat down when the only alternative was worse, and he stared at the table in front of him, with the expression of someone filing something away for later. Naomi turned back to Mrs. Lim. She said softly, "Grandmother, do you need anything else?" Mrs. Lim looked up at her, The older woman's eyes were bright. Not with tears exactly, but with something adjacent to them, the particular emotion of someone who has just watched an act of protection they didn't ask for and didn't expect. She shook her head. Naomi squeezed the edge of her table gently. Not her hand, just the table, just enough to say you're still here, you're not going anywhere, and turned back to Emeka. "Okay, Cher," she said, her voice completely natural, the New Orleans in it unhidden and unrushed, as if the last 90 seconds had been a brief weather event now past. "Where were we?" Emeka blinked. Then, very quietly, he smiled. "Bingsu," he said. "I think I want the bingsu." "Good choice," Naomi said, and wrote it down. She did not look at table 7. But at table 7, Park Joon-seo, who had not looked up from the surface of the table since he silenced Kwon, who had eaten his doenjang jjigae with the methodical quiet of a man accustomed to eating alone, slowly raised his eyes. He watched Naomi move back to the counter, watched her say something to Deanna that made Deanna exhale for the first time in 2 minutes, watched her check on the French professor without being asked, watched her laugh briefly, small, private, not for the room, at something the professor said. He picked up his coffee cup, drank, set it down. His face did something then that none of his men had vocabulary for. It wasn't softness exactly. It wasn't surprise. It was the expression of a man who has walked the same city for 40 years and has just turned a corner he didn't know existed. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked back down at the table. But the corner had been turned, and Park Joon-seo, who planned everything, who had not been caught off guard since his father's funeral 15 years ago, who had built his entire life on the premise that he could see everything coming, had not seen this coming at all. Outside, in the lead SUV, 30 minutes later, Kwon sat in the front passenger seat. The driver knew better than to speak. The 2 men in the back knew better than to breathe audibly. Kwon looked straight ahead at the rain on the windshield. He was not angry. Anger was loud, and Kwon had learned long ago that the quiet versions of things were the ones that lasted. What he felt was something colder and more patient than anger, something that would wait as long as it needed to. He thought about the waitress, the way she'd looked up at him, the way she hadn't moved. He thought about the boss's one word, Anja. 22 years. He had given this family 22 years. And tonight, in a diner in Itaewon, in front of staff and customers and a Nigerian student ordering shaved ice, the boss had used one word to reduce him to nothing. Because of a waitress. Kwon's jaw tightened once, then released. He could be patient. He was very good at patient. If you're feeling this, leave a comment below. Tell me. Was Naomi right to stand her ground? Because where I'm from, what she just did took something most people don't have. Drop it in the comments and don't go anywhere. He came back 3 nights later. No SUVs, no Kwon. No men arranging themselves around the furniture like they owned it. Just Park Joon-seo in his plain dark coat walking through the door of Celeste's at 9:47 p.m. on a Friday, sitting down at table 7 and folding his hands on the table with the patience of a man who had decided something and was prepared to wait for it. Naomi saw him the moment he walked in. She finished taking the order she was on, wrote it down completely, tucked her pen away. Then she walked to table 7 and stood across from him with her notepad open and her face giving nothing. Same order. He looked up at her, those still deep water eyes. Yes. Then, before she could turn, and I would like to speak with you, when you have a moment. I'm working. I know, he said, when you have a moment. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she went to put the order in. Deanna materialized at her shoulder before she reached the kitchen door. Naomi, he came back, alone. Why is he alone? That is not a good sign. That is actually a worse. Diana. What? Go back to your coffee. She brought his order when it was ready. Set it down. He said nothing until she turned to leave, and then he said her name. Not excuse me, not miss, her name, which meant he'd asked someone, which meant he'd thought about this before he walked through the door. She turned back. Park Joon-seo looked at her with the expression of a man who had prepared words and was now, in the moment of using them, aware of how insufficient they were. He said, "My man behaved badly on Tuesday. The decision to clear the tables was his. It was wrong. That is on me, because everything my people do is on me." He said it in 4 sentences. Flat, specific, no decoration and no ego surviving anywhere in it. It was the most direct apology Naomi had ever received from anyone in her life, and she had received exactly 0 apologies from men who looked like they owned things. She studied him. "Is that what you came back to say?" "Yes." "Okay," she said. "Don't let it happen again." She refilled his water without being asked and walked away. At the counter, Diana was staring at her with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering everything she thought she knew about the nature of courage. Naomi poured herself a glass of water and drank it and said nothing because there was nothing to say. The man had apologized. She had received it. That was the transaction. What she didn't say, what she didn't give space to, not yet, not in the middle of a Friday service, was that the apology had been genuine, genuinely specific and genuinely without performance. She had spent enough of her life around performed apologies to know the difference, and the difference had registered somewhere underneath her professionalism, in a place she wasn't ready to examine. So she didn't examine it. She worked her tables. She brought the Lims their usual. They were back, both of them. Mrs. Lim wearing a slightly nicer blouse than usual, as if she'd dressed for something without knowing what. When Naomi set down Mr. Lim's tea, he looked up at her and said very quietly in Korean, "Thank you. For the other night." Naomi shook her head. "Anja giseo," she said. "Just stay seated. Stay here. Keep coming back." Mrs. Lim reached out and briefly touched Naomi's hand. Naomi held it together until she got back to the kitchen. He came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, always table 7, always the same order, always alone. He never caused trouble, never summoned her with impatience, never performed the specific theatre of wealth that Naomi had expected and braced for. He ate. He drank his coffee. He sat with the quality of stillness that she was beginning to understand was not coldness but containment. A man holding something very large very carefully so it didn't spill. She noticed things. She noticed them against her will, the way you noticed a song playing in another room when you were trying to concentrate on something else. She noticed that he always ordered doenjang jjigae, not the expensive cuts, not the premium items on the menu that men like him were supposed to order to signal their indifference to cost. Doenjang jjigae was a mother's recipe. A childhood order. The food you ate when you needed to feel like somewhere was still home. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when his phone buzzed. A specific tightening. The right side. The kind that came from holding a response behind your teeth. And then the way he exhaled once. Slowly. Completely. Before he read the message. Like a man preparing himself. She noticed that he never smiled, but his face did something else occasionally. Something careful and brief, like a door opening an inch, and then deciding against it. She told herself these were the observations of someone practicing appropriate caution. She told herself she was cataloguing him, the way she'd catalogued the men in the green notebook, times and descriptions and behaviour patterns. She told herself it was professional. She was not entirely honest with herself. The 4th visit was a slow Tuesday afternoon. October, the air outside doing that thing Seoul autumn air did, sharp and golden and slightly melancholy, the kind of weather that made you think about things you'd been postponing thinking about. 2 tables occupied, Emeka studying in the corner, the French professor with his usual. Naomi restocking the counter when Joon-seo arrived earlier than usual. 4 p.m., the between hours, the diner at its most unhurried. He sat. She brought his coffee before he ordered it, set it down without comment, began to turn. "Sit down," he said. Then, catching himself, the first time she'd seen him catch himself, "Please." She looked at him. "I'm working." "There are 2 tables," he said. "Please." Something about the second please was different from the first. The first was manners. The second was something closer to honest. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat. Straight-backed, arms folded loosely. The body language of someone allocating 5 minutes, and not a second more. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his coffee cup. Then, "I have a daughter." Naomi waited. 16. Her name is Soo-yeon. He said the name with a specific quality. The way people said names they were afraid of losing the right to say. "She called me 3 weeks ago. About a school recital. She was telling me the date, and I had another call coming in, and I said I would call her back." He stopped. "Did you?" Naomi said. "No." The words sat between them on the table like something he'd been carrying in his pocket for 3 weeks, and had finally set down. Naomi looked at him. This man who silenced rooms with one word, who owned port contracts and infrastructure, who had reduced Kwon to his chair with a murmur, sitting across from her in a diner in Itaewon, looking exactly like what he was underneath all of it, a father who hadn't called back. "Then that's your answer," she said simply. "Whatever you're trying to figure out about yourself, that's where you start." She stood up. Table 3 needed checking. She was halfway across the floor when she heard him say, very quietly, almost to himself, "She stopped calling after that." Naomi stopped walking, didn't turn around, stood still for one moment, with her hand resting on the back of an empty chair. Then she went to check on table 3. But she thought about Soo-yeon for the rest of the night, a 16-year-old girl waiting for a phone that didn't ring. She knew that feeling. She knew it from a different kind of absence, but she knew the shape of it, the way you kept checking even after you'd told yourself to stop. That night, after closing, she sat in the back office with the debt ledger and the green notebook, and she opened the notebook to the page she kept for reasons to stay. She didn't write anything new. She just read what was already there. Mrs. Lim's first date, Emeka's tips, the smell of Celeste in the kitchen walls, and then, without entirely meaning to, she thought about a man who ate his mother's comfort food alone every Tuesday, and hadn't called his daughter back. She closed the notebook. "Not your business, Naomi," she said out loud to the empty office. The empty office didn't argue, but it didn't agree either. "I need you to pause for 1 second, because he didn't come back to impress her. He didn't come back with power or money or anything that usually works for men like him. He came back with the truth, and she gave him the most honest thing anyone had given him in years. He came back the following Sunday. No coat again." Naomi was starting to understand that the coat was armour and the Sundays without it were the truest version of his visits, the ones where something in him had decided, before he even walked through the door, to be slightly less defended than usual. He sat at table 7. She brought his coffee. He wrapped both hands around the cup the way she'd noticed he did on the Sundays. Like warmth was something he'd been rationing, and had decided to stop rationing just for this hour. The diner was quiet. A young couple at the window table, early in whatever they were, still at the stage of laughing too quickly at everything the other said. Mr. Bayek's radio playing something old and slow from the kitchen. Jion folding napkins at the counter with the focused concentration of someone trying very hard not to appear to be listening to anything. Joon-seo looked up when Naomi set down his coffee. "I called her," he said. Naomi pulled out the chair across from him, sat down properly, both hands around her own cup. "Soo-yeon," he continued, "we spoke for 11 minutes. He said it like the number mattered, and it did. She understood that. 11 minutes from a 16-year-old girl who had stopped initiating calls was not 11 minutes. It was a door that had been closed for months, opening just enough to let light through. She told me about her friend Chaeyeon, who forgot her sheet music at the recital and had to play from memory. A pause. She laughed, telling me. I hadn't heard her laugh in... He stopped. "A long time," Naomi finished. "Yes." "Did she cry?" He looked at her. "At the end. She said she didn't know why." "I know why," Naomi said quietly. "She'd already started grieving you. And then you called. And grief doesn't know what to do when the thing it's mourning comes back." Joon-seo was very still. Outside, a motorbike passed. The young couple at the window laughed at something. Ji-yeon dropped a napkin and picked it up with exaggerated casualness. "My grandmother used to say," Naomi continued, her voice lower now, the New Orleans in it surfacing the way it did when she was speaking from somewhere real rather than somewhere professional, "that tears are just feelings that ran out of room." She looked at her coffee. "Soo-yeon had a lot of feelings and nowhere to put them. You gave her somewhere." She looked back up. "Don't stop calling," she said. Simply. Finally. Like it was the only instruction that mattered. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was doing that careful thing. The door opening an inch. The brief movement of a man allowing himself to be seen. "In Korean," he said slowly, "there is a word. Nunchi." He watched her face. The ability to read what isn't said, to feel the weight underneath the surface of things. "We have that in New Orleans," Naomi said. "My grandmother called it knowing. She said some people are born with it and some people earn it. Which are you?" "Earned," she said. He nodded once. Like that was the answer he'd expected and the answer he respected most. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The particular silence of two people who have said something real and are giving it space to settle. The young couple at the window had moved past the laughing too quickly stage and into the leaning slightly closer stage. Ji-yeon was now folding the same napkin for the 4th time. Then Joon-seo set down his cup, looked at her directly with those still dark eyes. "I want to take you to dinner," he said. The diner did not stop. The radio kept playing. The couple kept leaning. But something in the air at table 7 went very quiet. Naomi looked at him. She thought about the 7 entries in her green notebook, the 2 generous tips, the still hands and the unturned newspaper pages. She thought about Han Seok-jin's briefcase and the document with the zeros and what it meant that he'd sent it 3 days after Kwon. She thought about what her mother Odette would say, and what Deanna would say, and what Mamie, who had been dead 11 years and was still the loudest voice in any room Naomi needed her, would say. She thought about 11 minutes, about a 16-year-old girl who cried because she didn't know why. "I need to understand what I'm walking into," she said. "So do I," he said. "Not it's fine or don't worry or any of the 100 reassurances a man in his position could have deployed. Just the truth, level and unhurried. So do I." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'll think about it," she said. Stood up, picked up the coffee pot. He nodded. Didn't push. Didn't perform patience. Just had it the way certain people had it. Naturally and without announcement. She was halfway to the counter when his voice came, quiet and unhurried. "There is also a word. Jong." She stopped, didn't turn around. "It is not love," he said. "It is not friendship. It is what builds between people who spend enough time near each other. It does not ask permission. It does not announce itself." A pause. "It simply arrives." She stood with her back to him, and the coffee pot in her hand, and the radio playing something old from the kitchen. "Is that a warning?" she said. A long pause. "Yes," he said. She walked to the counter, set down the coffee pot, did not look back. Ji-yeon was staring at her with the expression of someone who had just watched an entire season of drama compressed into 4 minutes. "Not a word," Naomi said. "I didn't... not... one... word." Ji-yeon pressed her lips together, nodded, then immediately took out her phone under the counter and started typing, which Naomi chose not to see because some battles were not worth fighting tonight. She went to the back office, sat down, opened the green notebook. Not the expenses page, not the watcher list. The other page, the reasons to stay. She read through it slowly. Then she picked up her pen, and in the margin, in small, careful letters, she wrote one word, Jong, underlined it once, closed the notebook. "Not your business, Naomi," she said to the empty office. The empty office, as always, didn't argue. But the notebook was still open when she came back 20 minutes later, and the word was still there, and she looked at it for a long time before she turned the light off. 4 days later, she called Deanna. Deanna answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. "I'm going," Naomi said. Silence. Then, "I'll be at the bar." "You're not coming." Wide-brimmed hat, "You won't see me." "Deanna." "I love you, and I'll be at the bar." The line went dead. Naomi looked at her phone for a moment. Then, despite everything, despite the green notebook and the watcher list and the 2 generous tips and the 9 months of cooperating with a federal prosecutor that she didn't know about yet, she smiled, small, private, not for the room, just for herself, just for a second. The restaurant had no sign outside, 13th floor of a building in Hanam-dong that looked from the street like a private residence. No indication, no announcement, just a discreet elevator that required a code and opened into a room that felt like someone had removed everything unnecessary from the concept of dinner and kept only what mattered. 6 tables, warm low light, the kind of quiet that didn't happen accidentally. Joon-seo was already there when Naomi stepped out of the elevator. Standing. She hadn't expected the standing. It was such a simple thing. A man rising when a woman entered a room. But it landed differently when the man was someone who didn't perform anything. He stood because he meant it. That was the difference. She was wearing deep burgundy, her grandmother's colour. Mamie had called it a decision colour. The colour you wore when you'd made up your mind about something and wanted your whole body to know it. Her hair was up. No armour, no performance. Just herself, fully assembled. He looked at her, the way people looked at things they weren't going to describe out loud. Then he pulled her chair. Said nothing about how she looked. The nothing was the loudest thing in the room. They started with small things. The way you started when you were building towards something large, and both of you knew it, and neither of you wanted to arrive before the foundation was ready. He asked about New Orleans. She described it, the way you described a place that lived inside you rather than behind you. The heat that sat on your skin like a hand. The way the city's relationship with water was ancient and unresolved. Built below sea level, surviving by insistence rather than logic. The music that came out of grief there like nowhere else on earth, as if the city had learned centuries ago that the only way through sorrow was to make it beautiful. He listened completely, not preparing his response while she spoke, just receiving it. "It sounds like Seoul," he said. She looked at him. "Old money dressed as something cleaner," he said. "A city built on water and stubbornness. Music that carries the weight of things that happened before you were born." He paused. "Beautiful in a way that costs something." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "exactly like that." Something settled between them at the table. Not comfort. Something more honest than comfort. The specific ease of two people who had spent their whole lives being slightly foreign to every room they entered, and had just found someone who understood that particular tiredness without needing it, explained. She picked up her glass. "Tell me the truth," she said. "All of it. I'd rather know than not know." He looked at her for a long moment, set down his chopsticks, folded his hands on the table with the stillness of a man who had made a decision before he walked through the door and was now honouring it. And he told her. The Park family business was real. Infrastructure, port contracts, civic contribution, 40 years of arrangements that existed in the space between legal and not, built by his grandfather, expanded by his father, inherited by him before he was old enough to understand what inheritance really meant. It had fed him and educated him and shaped everything he knew about how the world worked. It had also shaped everything he knew about what the world cost. He had tried to restructure it twice. The first time at 34, consultants, restructured divisions, 2 operations moved into fully legitimate frameworks. It had held for 18 months. Then his brother Jae-sung had quietly rebuilt everything that had been dismantled, using connections Joon-seo hadn't known existed, and by the time Joon-seo understood what had happened, it was already load-bearing again. The second attempt at 38 had lasted 11 months before the same result. "Jae-sung is not cruel," Joon-seo said, and the way he said it, with a complicated, exhausted precision, told Naomi everything about what it meant to love someone whose choices you couldn't stop. "He is practical. The arrangements work, the city functions. People are paid. He genuinely does not understand why I keep trying to change something that runs. But you know why," Naomi said. "Yes. Because your children will inherit it." He looked at her. That door opened more than an inch this time. "Yes," he said quietly. "Exactly that." She looked at her plate for a moment. Thought about Soo-yeon, 16 years old, crying on the phone because her father called back, inheriting a name that meant something in this city before she was old enough to decide what she wanted it to mean. "The investigation," Naomi said. "Real," he said. "Prosecutor Seo Yoon-ji. 3 years building it. The RICO framework is solid. Several Port Authority officials are directly exposed. 2 of Jae-sung's operations." He said it without resentment. The flat acknowledgement of someone who respected the work even when it was aimed at him. "And you," Naomi said. Not a question. He looked at her steadily across the table. The candlelight between them moved slightly, as if the room itself was leaning in. "I have been cooperating with Prosecutor Seo," he said, "for 9 months. Quietly, through Han Seok-jin. Structured disclosure. Enough to satisfy the framework without exposing people who don't deserve exposure." The restaurant was very quiet. "Jae-sung doesn't know," he continued. "If he finds out before the indictments are unsealed—" He stopped. The space finished the sentence for him. The space was sufficient. Naomi set down her glass, looked at this man across the table who had just handed her information that could end him, who had laid it out clean and undecorated with the precision of someone who had decided, before the elevator, before the restaurant, maybe before the Sunday without the coat, that whatever came next between them would not be built on omission. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you would have found out," he said. "You already have the notebook. You're already watching the watchers." A pause. "And I would rather you hear everything from me while I can still look at you." She absorbed that. The notebook. He knew about the notebook, which meant he knew about the watchers, which meant he knew what Kwon was doing and had chosen not to stop it yet for reasons she would need to think about later. "The watchers are Kwon," she said. "Yes. You haven't pulled him back." "If I pull him back, he goes further underground," Joon-seo said. "Right now, I can see what he's doing. The moment I move on him directly, I can't. He looked at her. "You are safer with me watching him watch you than with him operating where I can't see." Naomi was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Seoul moved in its nighttime way. Distant, indifferent, beautiful. She thought about Mamie, about all the way or not at all, about a green notebook with a word underlined once in the margin. "My Aunt Celeste," she said, "left me a diner and 14 million won in debt and a sign on the wall that she painted herself." She paused. "She also left me the understanding that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a powerful man. It's a powerful man who decides to be honest." She looked at him. "Because then you have to decide what to do with the honesty." "What do you do with it?" he said. She looked at him for a long time across the candlelight. "I haven't decided yet," she said, "but I'm still sitting here." He looked at her. That careful movement in his face. Not the inch now. Further than that. Enough that she could see what was behind it. Not softness exactly. Something more durable than softness. Something that had been there a long time waiting for the right room to exist in. The food came and went in quiet succession. They talked about smaller things again. Not because the large things were finished, but because both of them understood that large things needed rest between movements. He told her about the Han River in winter, how it froze at the edges, and the city walked along the ice as if that was ordinary. She told him about New Orleans in August. The way the heat made everything slow and deliberate. The way her neighborhood smelled like jasmine and rain and something frying always, always something frying. He said, "I would like to see it." She looked at him. "New Orleans?" "Yes." She picked up her glass, said nothing for a moment. Then, "My grandmother would have had opinions about you." "Good opinions?" "Mamie didn't have good or bad opinions," Naomi said. "She had accurate ones." A pause. "She would have said you were a man who knew the price of everything and was only now learning the value." He was quiet. "She would have fed you," Naomi added. That was her version of a verdict. Something moved in his face, slow and complete, like a tide rather than a wave. And for the first time since she had known him, in a restaurant on the 13th floor of a building with no sign, Park Joon-seo almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The closest thing to it she had seen, and it was, she thought, the most unguarded, beautiful thing she'd witnessed in 14 months in this city. She looked at her glass so he wouldn't see that she thought so. They stayed until the restaurant was empty around them. When the elevator came, he stood back for her to enter first. In the lobby, he said, "Thank you for coming." Not for a good evening. Not for the company. For coming. As if he understood what it had cost her, and was acknowledging the cost specifically. "Thank you for the truth," she said. They stood for a moment in the lobby. The city outside the glass. Both of them knowing that something had shifted at that table irrevocably, and neither of them naming it, because naming it would make it real, and real things could be lost, and neither of them was ready for that yet. He said, "I'll have a car." "I have a car," she said. He almost smiled again. "Of course you do." She walked out into the Seoul night, stood on the pavement for a moment, looked up at the city the way she sometimes looked at it when it surprised her, when it stopped being the place she was surviving and became briefly, unexpectedly, the place she was living. Her phone buzzed. Deanna. How was it? She looked at the message for a moment. Then she typed back, "Go home, Deanna." 3 seconds. "I've been at this bar for 2 hours and the bartender thinks I'm going through a divorce. How was it?" Naomi put her phone in her pocket, got in her car, sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. She thought about what he'd said, all of it. The brother, the indictments, the 9 months, the notebook. She thought about, "I would rather you hear it from me, while I can still look at you." She started the car. She drove back to Itaewon, parked outside the diner. sat looking at the dark windows and Celeste's sign, invisible from here but present the way certain things were always present whether you could see them or not. Didadiashaman Gongjada. Warmth costs nothing. She got out of the car, unlocked the diner, went to the back office, opened the green notebook to the Reasons to Stay page, read it through once, then picked up her pen and wrote at the bottom, underneath everything else, in the careful handwriting she used when something mattered. He told me the truth when it cost him something. She looked at it for a long moment, then closed the notebook, turned off the light, went home. 6 weeks later, the indictments dropped. Naomi heard about it the way most of Seoul heard about it. A news alert at 7 a.m., brief and seismic, the kind of headline that used words like unprecedented and sweeping and decades long in the same sentence. She was in the back office with the debt ledger when her phone lit up. She read it once, then sat very still for a moment the way she sat when something large needed to be absorbed before it could be processed. 14 names. Park Jae-sung was first. 6 family associates. 2 Port Authority officials. 3 contractors. And near the bottom of the list, in the specific positioning of someone whose inclusion had been carefully, deliberately considered, Kwon. Not for the port crimes, not for the arrangements or the contracts or the 40 years of infrastructure dressed as something cleaner. Kwon was indicted for ordering unauthorized surveillance on a civilian, for the systematic personal harassment of a private individual conducted without sanction and without knowledge of his employer. The green notebook, times, dates, descriptions, 7 entries of still hands and unturned newspaper pages, and 2 generous tips, had been submitted as evidence 3 weeks earlier through Han Seok-jin, who had appeared at the diner one Tuesday morning and asked for it with the quiet precision of a man who knew exactly what it was worth and exactly what it would do. Naomi had handed it over without hesitation. She had started a new one. Kwon's patience had been very good. Hers had been better. Park Joon-seo's name was not on the list. She didn't hear from him that day, or the next. On the 3rd day after the indictments, Ji-yeon came in for the morning shift with her phone already out, vibrating with news alerts and drama-level commentary from her group chats, and spent the first 20 minutes of prep oscillating between wanting desperately to say something to Naomi and understanding from something in Naomi's posture that this was not the morning for it. Mr. Bayek arrived at 7 a.m. as he always arrived, without announcement, without variation, moving directly to the kitchen and beginning the prep, with the quiet faithfulness of a man for whom routine was its own form of devotion. He had said nothing about the indictments. He would say nothing. That was Mr. Bayek. But when he set Naomi's morning coffee on the pass-through without being asked, the way he had done every morning for 14 months without ever discussing it, she thought about Celeste and the 30 years of people who had simply continued to show up, and felt something in her chest that she didn't have room for right now, and filed away for later. The retired professor came in at 9, ordered his milky tea, opened his book. The page turned this time, she noticed, the way she noticed everything, and found it quietly reassuring. Some things were just what they appeared to be. She was grateful for those things. The morning passed. The lunch rush came and went. Ji-yeon dropped a tray and recovered it, and looked at Naomi for judgment, and received instead a brief nod that meant it happens, keep moving, which Ji-yeon received with the relief of someone who had been bracing for more and got grace instead. At 4:47 p.m., 17 minutes before the afternoon lull ended, the diner door opened. Naomi was behind the counter. She looked up. Park Joon-seo stood in the doorway. No coat, no men, no SUVs visible through the window. Just him. And he looked, for the first time in all the months she had known him, like a man who had put something down that he had been carrying for a very long time. Not defeated, not broken. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding something enormous and has finally, after years, been allowed to set it down. He looked older than usual, and more real than usual, and she thought that was probably the same thing. She came around the counter, unlocked the door fully. It had been on the latch, stood back. He came in. She didn't ask if he was okay. He wasn't, and they both knew it, and asking would have made it smaller. Instead, she went to the kitchen, told Mr. Bayek he could go early, waited until she heard the back door close, and came back out. She made coffee. Real coffee. The slow way. The way Celeste had made it when someone needed something more than caffeine. She set it on table 7, sat across from him, both hands around her own cup. He looked at the surface of the table for a long moment. Then, "Jae-sung called me this morning." She waited. "He knew," Joon-seo said. "He's known for 3 months. He didn't try to stop it." A pause that carried something immense inside it. He said he was tired, that he'd been tired for a long time. His voice was completely steady, and that steadiness was the saddest thing she'd heard in months. He said he was glad one of us was still trying. Naomi looked at him. This man whose brother had just been indicted partly because of information he'd provided, who had spent 9 months cooperating with a federal prosecutor in secret, carrying that alone, protecting people who deserved protection and dismantling people who didn't, and then sitting at table 7 every Tuesday eating his mother's comfort food and almost smiling at things she said. "He loves you," she said quietly. "Yes," Joon-seo said. "It's complicated." "Love usually is," she said. "That doesn't make it less." He looked at her. "No," he said. "It doesn't." They sat in the quiet of the empty diner. Outside, Seoul moved in its late afternoon way, the light going golden and slanted, Itaewon beginning its slow transition from day neighborhood to night neighborhood, the street filling gradually with the particular mix of people that made this part of the city unlike any other part. Then Joon-seo reached into his coat. He placed something on the table between them. Not an envelope, not a document. A single folded piece of paper. Small, precise. The fold made with care. He slid it across the table toward her without speaking. She looked at it, then at him. He said nothing, just waited with the patience that was the most constant thing about him. She picked it up, unfolded it, read it. We don't see what it says. The camera, if this were a film, would stay on her face, would watch it move through something, would watch her arrive somewhere she hadn't expected to arrive and stand there quietly, both hands holding the paper, completely still. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "When did you write this?" she said. "The night you told me to call Soo-yeon back," he said. 4 months ago. Before the dinner, before the Han River bench, before she'd agreed to anything or given him anything or indicated by any measurable standard that this was a direction either of them was heading. He had written it 4 months ago, and carried it in his coat through every Tuesday and every Sunday without coat, and every charged silence at table 7, and had said nothing, had waited until there was nothing left to protect and nowhere left to hide, and the only thing remaining was the truth of it. Naomi looked at the paper in her hands. "Share," she said softly. The word came out before she caught it. Her most unguarded word, her grandmother's word, the word she gave to people she meant. Slipping out natural and complete, and she didn't take it back. Didn't correct it. Just let it exist in the air between them. He heard it. She saw him hear it. The careful door opened all the way. Park Joon-seo stood up. He buttoned his coat. That single gesture of composure, the one she recognized. The armor going back on. She thought for one disorienting moment that he was leaving, that this was the end of it, that the note and the share and the 4 months of carrying had been the entirety of what he had, and now it was given and he was going. He wasn't leaving. He stood at the side of table 7 in the empty diner in the late afternoon light of Itaewon, and he bowed. Not the polite social nod of greeting, not the slight professional acknowledgement. A full, slow, deliberate bow. His whole body, held for 3 full seconds. The bow of complete sincerity. The bow that in Korean tradition carries one meaning and one meaning only. I see you. Fully, all the way down. As someone I am accountable to. As someone whose dignity is not beneath mine but equal to it. As someone I owe my honesty to and have tried, imperfectly, to honour. The bow of a man offering everything he had left after the indictments, and the brother and the 9 months and the note, which was not power, not contracts, not the Park family name, just himself, exactly as he was. He had never bowed like this outside a funeral. Naomi stood. She was from New Orleans, 7th Ward. From a lineage of women who had cooked for people who never thanked them, and cleaned houses that were never theirs, and raised children that the world tried to diminish, and had done all of it, with their heads level, and their spines straight, and their dignity so intact, it had become the family's most valuable inheritance. She understood exactly what this bow cost him. She understood exactly what it meant. Slowly, completely, with the full weight of who she was and where she came from, and what it had cost her to stay 14 months in a city that stared and carry a dead woman's debt and stand unmoved while a man twice her size rose from his chair. She bowed back. Same depth, same 3 seconds, same completeness. Not submission, not performance. Recognition. 2 people from cities built on water and grief and survival, in a diner in Itaewon, choosing to see each other all the way down through every barrier that should have made it impossible. The hand-painted sign above them still and faithful. He straightened, looked at her one last time with those still dark eyes, and in them, finally, after all the Tuesdays and all the Sundays and all the careful almost smiles, something completely open, something that had stopped protecting itself. Then he walked to the door, opened it, stepped out into the Itaewon evening. Naomi stood at table 7 for a long moment, the note still in her hands, pressed against her chest. The diner quiet around her. Celeste's photograph above the register. The debt ledger in the back office with numbers that were, for the first time in 14 months, almost manageable. Because 3 weeks ago, an anonymous payment had cleared exactly half the outstanding lease arrears through a routing she hadn't asked about and wouldn't ask about and understood completely. She opened the note one more time, read 1 line, closed it. She walked to the door, turned the hand-painted sign from Dadim to Yolrim, closed to open. Then the door opened. Mr. and Mrs. Lim. Tuesday, right on time. 30 years of Tuesdays, and they were still here. Mr. Lim holding the door for his wife, Mrs. Lim stepping through with the particular contentment of someone arriving exactly where they were supposed to be. They saw Naomi, and they bowed, both of them. Not the casual greeting bow, a real one, small and genuine and full of everything that had happened on that Tuesday night, 2 months ago, when a woman had stood her ground between their table and something large and said they were here first and meant it all the way to her bones. Naomi bowed back, felt something move through her chest, warm and complete and grief-adjacent, the way all the best feelings were grief-adjacent when you'd lost someone you loved. Aunt Celeste, she thought. Look, she said to Mrs. Lim, her voice steady and warm. Your usual? Mrs. Lim smiled. Always, she said. Naomi went to get the coffee pot. She was not counting days any more. She wasn't counting anything. She was just here, in her aunt's diner, in this city that had stared and kept her anyway, with a note in her apron and a sign on the door, and 30 years of Tuesdays still walking through it. And for the first time since she'd arrived, that was not a consolation. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. She didn't come to Seoul looking for anything. She found something anyway. So did he. Neither of them was ready. Both of them stayed. If this story moved you, and I think it did, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because this channel is where ordinary people do extraordinary things, and we are just getting started. Drop one word in the comments, just one. Whatever this story left you with, we'll see you in the next one.